If you feel that the symbolism in these religious beliefs, these mythologies that are lived by these people, then you're following the colonial mind. The idea that only the colonists had the appropriate religion, everybody else was inferior. That has set up our global world today.
Starhawk also lectures at this Catholic college in California. Among her colleagues is Dominican Father Matthew Fox.
What strikes me is the vehemence of the letters I receive, the hate mail, regarding having a witch on our faculty. I thought that the burning of witches was settled several centuries ago, but people, right when they sign it, a good Christian, an ecumenical Christian, they say, you and your witch friend can burn in hell forever. And it's just amazing what this brings up, that there's a lot of buried material in a lot of Christians' lives.
This cross was erected in Trier, France, in 1132. It was a sign of the times, the symbol of a new religious cult that was sweeping across pagan Europe. Few people realized that the Christianization of Europe resulted in the loss of millions of lives. The Church of Rome set up the Inquisition to enforce its will. People who criticized the Church or held different beliefs were charged with heresy and executed as criminals. In 1554, Marianne Monjou was drowned for calling it the spirits of the Rhine. "For this is barbaric and an obscene right of the people," said Abbot Petrarch. Out of those religious persecutions came the witch hunts. 85% of those killed for the crime of witchcraft were women. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, thousands were burned in squares like this all over Europe.
We're never told this, but this was the women's Holocaust. We did have a women's Holocaust, and this was it. In terms of how many women were burned, it's very hard to get numbers. The high number that people use is 9 million over 300 or more years. So that there were huge, huge numbers of people who were burned and people who were killed by the Inquisition.
They left no written records. They shared no common grave. They took with them their stories, their beliefs, and the traditions of our pagan ancestors. The witch craze involved the destruction of a way of life that had endured for thousands of years. In villages all over feudal Europe, women and men worked side by side. Theirs was a religion of rural life and changing seasons, of oral traditions and beliefs passed on within families. We still call the earth our mother, a memory of the goddess traditions of our pagan past. For generations, people have climbed this hill in England to celebrate the arrival of spring. It's May Day, and the Morris men are waking up the earth with their staves and bells. Once, long ago, the Queen of the May presided over the celebrations. Rituals like this one were part of the religious practices of the majority of people in Europe until at least 1700. They were among the traditions targeted as witchcraft.
What's really important to think about when you think about goddess religions and when you think about pagan religions is that most pagan peoples lived on a particular part of the land. They had ceremonies and traditions and goddesses that were appropriate, and gods that were appropriate to them at a certain time. They made their rituals and their celebrations as things that were important because they were part of life experience. They helped the crops grow, they helped the animals come in, they helped talk about the relationship of the moon and the stars and the planets, and they really didn't have a lot to do with belief. They are based on action, experience, celebration, custom.
With the arrival of Christianity, belief became a way of life. Everywhere in Europe, churches were built over pagan shrines, and goddesses were turned into saints. Before the Christians came, people walked to a remote village in France to worship this Celtic goddess. Even after she was renamed Saint Foy, she was said to dispense healing to thousands of pilgrims, just as all mother goddesses in the past had done. But while the Christian Church allowed for saints, it offered no divine goddess to adore. The newly converted pagans found one of their own and demanded that she be recognized.
There's no question that in the Middle Ages, Mary was understood as a goddess figure. This is explicit in the writings of Mechtilde Magdeburg, a 13th century Beguine laywoman, who in fact ended her life as a nun, very politically active woman, kept a journal, which we have today, and several times in that journal she calls Mary goddess. And she was attacked by many of the clergy for saying that, but she never took it back. Furthermore, was that within 100 years, over 500 churches the size of cathedrals were constructed all over Europe, like Chartres Cathedral. And every one of them was dedicated to Mary. Now, you have to meditate on the phenomenon of this. You know, what can get a whole civilization, a whole people, to bring together its laborers, its artists, its bishops, its financiers, its architects, everybody to do one thing over a 100-year period.
To this day, Mary still bears the names of her pagan ancestors: Queen of Heaven, Lady of the World, Mother of God.
We can see that there were two kinds of religion. There was the religion of the elite, the formal Catholic Church religion, and then there was the popular religion of the ordinary people, who were by far the overwhelming majority of people in France, and their religion was still full of the old religion, the goddess religion, the nature religion, the religion of spirits.
The most famous visionary of her age was Joan of Arc. In 1429, she led the French to victory over the English after 100 years of war. 2 years later, she was condemned as a heretic and a witch by the same church that would eventually elevate her to sainthood. Prophetic and valiant in battle, the French later wrote of how her presence, goddess-like, had won and inspired them. A magic tree, a hilltop shrine, and a sacred spring in the countryside of France all played a part in Joan's early life. It was here she first heard the voices that would help her lead the French to battle. Joan gave her voices the names of Catholic saints, but her faith was deeply rooted in the old religion. She claimed that her voices gave her an authority greater than that of the Church.
And in fact, at the time that she was a girl, it was not unusual for women to take prophetic roles, to be visionary leaders or to be mystics. So she wasn't inventing this. This was part of the background that she grew up in as a possibility for women. And she was relying on individual inspiration, a direct pipeline. That wasn't acceptable. If people could rely on direct pipelines, they wouldn't need the church fathers anymore. They wouldn't need the institutional church. They wouldn't need the whole system of authority that was theological but was also related to all kinds of other areas of life besides spiritual practice. That was a direct challenge to the most important structures of authority of that time. By Joan's time, the church was increasingly rigid. It was increasingly on the defensive. And it got more and more doctrinaire, more and more concerned to quash dissent, to quash difference. It was more and more threatened by it because of the changes that were taking place in the broader society.
By the 15th century, in villages like this one in France, the old order was changing. For thousands of years, women had been the physicians of the people. They understood the principles of anatomy and nutrition. They birthed babies and held the dying in their arms. Priests fumed as the village wise woman received the honor and gratitude the church claimed for God alone.
The witches, the wise women, the healers, were always also the counselors. It's like a whole other tradition of knowledge and learning that has been suppressed because it had political implications.
The Inquisition announced that no one did more harm to the Catholic faith than midwives. They eased the pain of labor, God's punishment for Eve's sin. They interfered with God's will through the use of birth control and abortion. New laws proclaimed that any woman who dared cure without having studied was a witch and must die. Since most women were barred from university, the rise of the male medical profession was guaranteed.
What we're seeing here is the power structure of the church and the nobles declaring that the traditions, the women as healers and other traditions in the societies were now sacrilegious. They were hypocrisy and heretical. So they were taboo. And the only way you could find the right way to go would be through the church. Everything else was evil. And that's the way to get people connected to those kind of belief systems.